Running just a few minutes behind schedule, a mother burst through courthouse doors wearing medical scrubs stained with someone else's blood after responding to a roadside emergency. Rather than having her case heard, she watched her parental rights vanish instantly in a devastating court decision. What comes next for her? And how did someone who simply did what was right find herself in such a nightmare? The courthouse clock showed 9:14 a.m. as tension filled courtroom 2B at Charleston County Family Court like a heavy fog, thick, oppressive, and inescapable. Every seat was occupied. Charles Monroe sat confidently next to his legal counsel, projecting complete control. His expensive suit was immaculate, his collar crisp, and his silk tie radiated authority. Judge Howard Renshaw presided from his elevated position, a 62-year-old former military officer whose reputation throughout the Carolinas was built on strictness, punctuality, and zero tolerance for delays. His eyes found the clock once more. "She's not showing up," Charles's lawyer whispered with barely concealed satisfaction. "Your Honor," the attorney rose to his feet, "given the respondent's failure to appear at the scheduled time, we respectfully ask the court to proceed with a decision favoring my client." Judge Renshaw gave a single nod, his pen tapping the docket once. Having examined the documentation and submitted evidence, and noting the respondent's absence, this court awards temporary full custody of minor child Sadie Monroe to Mr. Charles Monroe, effective immediately. The gavel came down hard. The courtroom doors flew open with a crash. "I'm here!" Every head turned toward the entrance. There stood Dr. Elise Monroe, 38 years old, trauma surgeon, mother, and completely out of place in this refined hall of justice. Her green medical scrubs were wrinkled and marked with dried bloodstains. Her hospital badge remained clipped to her uniform. Her hands shook visibly. One knee showed scrapes from dried pavement. "Dr. Monroe," Judge Renshaw's voice cut through the air, "you have arrived late. This proceeding has already concluded." "Please, Your Honor, You were not present. This court has rendered its decision." Elise stumbled forward, her heart hammering in her chest. "I was trying to save someone who was dying," she managed, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and shock. "A pedestrian struck by a vehicle on Rutledge. Nobody else stopped. I couldn't just—" The judge remained unmoved. "You had a responsibility to appear here. You received notification weeks in advance. You were clearly told that no postponements would be granted." Elise stared in disbelief, struggling to process what was happening. She fought to breathe, but her chest felt constricted. "I wrapped his wounds. I maintained pressure on his injuries until paramedics arrived. I accompanied him in the ambulance. He's alive because I didn't keep driving." Her voice shattered on those final words. A ripple of whispers moved through the spectators, but Judge Renshaw's expression didn't change. "This is a legal proceeding, Dr. Monroe, not an emergency room. You made a choice not to put your child's interests first today. That decision reveals everything. Those calculated words hit their intended target perfectly." Elise's legs nearly buckled. She grabbed the bench ahead of her for support. "I didn't choose that over my daughter," she said in a whisper. "I chose to be the type of mother who stops when someone is hurt, because if my daughter were lying in that road, I'd pray someone would stop for her too." Judge Renshaw turned his back to her. "You may challenge this decision through appropriate legal channels. This session is concluded." The gavel struck a second time. In that instant, everything Elise had worked for, the endless nights, the extra shifts, the skipped meals and missed bedtime stories, the school conferences, the therapy expenses she covered alone, all of it collapsed. Her hands, once capable of wielding a scalpel with precision during chaos, now trembled uncontrollably. She collapsed onto the bench, too shocked to stand. Then the tears came. Not gentle. Composed weeping. Not the kind you can dry in a private bathroom. This was raw, primal sobbing from a woman who had just lost something irreplaceable. A mother, stripped of her identity, not because she lacked compassion, but because she possessed too much. Charles avoided looking in her direction. His attorney adjusted his necktie. Judge Renshaw rose and prepared to exit. But someone in the gallery's back row, a young court clerk, in her early 20s, was clutching her phone with shaking hands. She had captured the moment Elise entered the courtroom, recorded her words, her uniform, her painful honesty. Within 10 minutes, the footage appeared on Instagram with the caption, "Doctor arrives late to court after saving hit-and-run victim. Judge refuses to listen." By 10:15 a.m., it had accumulated 200,000 views. By 10:45, CNN's newsroom had picked it up. But Elise remained unaware of any of this. She sat in that courtroom, using trembling fingers to wipe tears from her face. Her lawyer, Sarah Colton, sat silently beside her, because no words existed for this moment. The courtroom gradually emptied. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke, except for one woman, a nurse seated quietly in the back who approached Elise with careful steps. She knelt down beside her. "My sister is breathing today because a doctor like you didn't drive past," she whispered softly. Elise looked up at her through red-rimmed, tear-filled eyes. "I don't want to become some kind of symbol," she said quietly. "I just wanted to remain." "Her mother." The nurse nodded with understanding. "You still are." By midday, the video had exploded across social media. Hashtags like Respect the Scrubs, Leather Be Heard, and Dr. Monroe were trending everywhere. News reporters were flooding the courthouse with calls. An NBC correspondent tweeted, "Something is fundamentally broken in a system that penalizes someone for arriving late only because they stopped to save a human life." Still, Elise remained indifferent to all of it, not yet understanding the impact. She sat on the courthouse steps with her head buried in her hands, her phone buzzing relentlessly, in her pocket. Sarah gently touched her shoulder. "Elise, there's something you need to witness." She handed Elise her phone. Elise squinted at the screen, bewildered, watching herself walk through those courtroom doors, hearing her voice break, and then she read the comments flooding in. This is what courage under pressure actually looks like. She didn't abandon her daughter. She demonstrated what true strength means. "I've never shed tears watching a courtroom video before, until this moment." Elise's hands flew to cover her mouth. For the first time that morning, her tears weren't born from devastation. She was crying because somehow people had truly seen her. And this was just the beginning. The courtroom held a different kind of silence now. Not empty quiet, but the profound stillness that follows genuine impact. The kind that settles deep into everyone present, whether they wanted to acknowledge it or not. Elise Monroe remained hunched at the defendant's table, her scrubs dampened with a stranger's blood and her own quiet heartbreak. Beyond the courthouse walls, however, the world was transforming. The video of her emotional entrance had touched something profound in the collective soul of the Internet. It had evolved beyond mere footage. It became a declaration, a mirror, reflecting a truth too many people recognized, that sometimes doing what's right costs you everything. At 12:03 p.m., someone from Roper Hospital identified her in the video and posted publicly, "That's Dr. Monroe. She rescued a father of 3 this morning. He wouldn't have survived another 5 minutes without her intervention. She ran directly from the ambulance to court." That single comment transformed everything. Inside the courthouse, Elise sat in a frigid hallway chair with her attorney beside her, both staring into space, when a court clerk rushed toward them, speaking rapidly into her phone. She stopped abruptly, eyes wide, then addressed Sarah directly. "The judge requests both of you return to courtroom 2B immediately." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Right now," the clerk nodded, lowering her voice conspiratorially. He watched the video. Elise stood slowly, her legs stiff from stress, her heart uncertain whether to feel hope or prepare for more pain. They re-entered the same courtroom where she had felt herself break apart just moments earlier. Now only Judge Renshaw remained, seated once again with papers spread before him, though he wasn't touching them. His expression was distant, unreadable. He didn't wait for them to speak first. I have examined something significant during the recess, he said, his voice more controlled, gentler than before. It has come to this court's attention that the circumstances surrounding your delayed arrival may require a re-evaluation of the previous ruling. Elise didn't dare breathe. Sarah, however, leaned forward attentively. Your Honor, if I may add, we also have a witness who arrived during the break, prepared to speak regarding Dr. Monroe's actions this morning. Judge Renshaw looked up sharply. Who might that be? Before Sarah could respond, the doors opened. Dr. Ronald Stratton, head of Roper Hospital's Emergency Trauma Department, entered wearing a navy blazer over surgical scrubs and carrying a manila folder. Sir, he began with calm, steady authority, I am here because Elise Monroe performed something this morning that most people wouldn't attempt. He approached the witness stand without needing to be sworn in, his credentials already confirmed by court staff. At 8:26 a.m., Elise was traveling to this courthouse when a 911 emergency was reported. A male victim, hit and run, bleeding critically near Rutledge. Emergency services were delayed. She stopped her vehicle, applied pressure to stop arterial bleeding, stabilized his breathing, performed chest compressions twice, and accompanied the victim to our emergency room. Without her presence, without her decision to stop, that man would have died. He's currently stable following surgery, conscious, breathing, alive. He paused deliberately. The victim's wife arrived shortly after with their youngest daughter. They both asked the same question: who saved him? We told them, a woman in medical scrubs who left the scene the moment he was stabilized because she had a custody hearing to attend. He handed the folder to the judge. Inside was a note written on crumpled pink paper in a child's handwriting. Thank you for saving my dad. You are my hero, even if you don't know me. Judge Renshaw read it slowly, his hand resting on the paper longer than necessary. He cleared his throat quietly. Dr. Stratton, he said softly, in your professional assessment, was Dr. Monroe negligent in her obligations to this court? The doctor didn't hesitate. She fulfilled both responsibilities the only way a genuine hero could. She prioritized life first, then came here to fight for her own. The entire room seemed to exhale collectively. Sarah straightened in her chair. Elise felt her breath catch, but held back the tears forming once again. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened again. A figure entered hesitantly. A man, bruised, bandaged, moving with difficulty. The victim himself, the very person Elise had saved. Excuse me, he said softly. I don't want to interrupt, but that woman, he pointed directly at Elise. She never asked for gratitude. She didn't even tell me her name. She just kept repeating, stay with me. Please don't give up. As if I were her own family member. He continued, I don't understand anything about her legal situation. But I know this. She appeared for me when I was dying. And if that's the kind of mother she is, then her child is the most fortunate one in this entire building. The silence that followed was electric. For 30 full seconds, nobody moved. Then Judge Renshaw slowly turned toward Elise. Dr. Monroe, he said, no longer cold. You stated earlier that you didn't choose between your daughter and your patient, that you chose to be the kind of mother you'd want at your child's bedside. That statement has remained with me. He addressed the court reporter directly. Strike all previous judgments rendered in this session from the record permanently. Sarah gasped audibly. Elise covered her mouth, struggling to maintain composure. The judge continued, This courtroom has witnessed too many polished facades and well-dressed absences, but today we observed someone arrive bloodied, breathless, and vulnerable. And she still held this room together better than most ever could. He turned toward Charles, who had remained silent throughout the second portion of the hearing, watching his confidence evaporate like water from a broken vessel. Mr. Monroe, unless you wish to object. Charles's attorney leaned in to whisper something, but Charles shook his head firmly. He stood, straightened his tie, and declared, I withdraw my petition. Judge Renshaw raised an eyebrow. You withdraw what? I withdraw everything. She's not unfit. She's remarkable. His voice was quiet, defeated. No fight remained in him. The gallery stirred with emotion, murmurs mixing with suppressed tears. Then, unexpectedly, Judge Renshaw stood. Let the record show that the earlier ruling is completely vacated. Full physical and legal custody remains with Dr. Elise Monroe. A long pause filled the air. And let the record also show that medical scrubs are not disrespectful attire in this courtroom. In fact, they represent the clearest indication of what selflessness truly looks like. Then something remarkable occurred. One by one, people began rising to their feet. A woman near the back, a nurse, stood first. Then a custodian, a clerk, a law student, Sarah herself, even the bailiff. They didn't applaud. They didn't cheer. They simply stood in recognition, in reverence. Elise sat frozen, unsure how to process the moment, the weight of unspoken emotion suddenly lifting from her chest. Slowly, she rose as well. Not for herself, but for the woman in that video. For the little girl waiting at home. For the kind of love that doesn't announce itself. It simply appears. As Judge Renshaw prepared to leave the courtroom, he turned once more and said, "Dr. Monroe, thank you for reminding this court what honor looks like when it's too exhausted to wear formal attire." Elise didn't respond. She couldn't find words, but she smiled. And for the first time all morning, her hands stopped trembling. The story should have concluded there. Custody restored, dignity reclaimed, the courtroom standing not in ceremony but in tribute. But beyond those courthouse walls, something far greater had already set in motion. The video of Elise's entrance, her shaking voice, her blood-stained. Scrubs hadn't just gone viral, it had struck a nerve in the heart of a weary nation. By evening, every major news outlet had covered it. CNN featured the headline, "Doctor Criticized in Court After Saving Life. The Viral Testimony of Grace." Fox News called it, "Scrubs and Justice, Where Heart Met the Bench." MSNBC, ABC, NPR. They all replayed the clip of Elise entering the courtroom, exhausted and apologetic, only to be dismissed before she could speak. But more powerful than the video were the responses that followed. Thousands of nurses, doctors, paramedics, teachers, and single mothers flooded social media, sharing their own stories of being punished for doing what was right, missing important meetings to help someone in crisis, being told they looked unprofessional after working double shifts, being judged for being human. Elise Monroe had transformed from a woman in scrubs into a mirror, and the country couldn't look away. Hospitals nationwide declared Scrub Solidarity Week, encouraging staff to wear their uniforms proudly wherever they went. Social media exploded with Monroe Standard, a phrase created by a high school student in Atlanta who posted, "Professionalism isn't about appearance, it's about purpose." Elise's image appeared on T-shirts, murals, even a billboard in Times Square, though she remained unaware of it all, because while the world watched, Elise was doing what she always did, showing up. 3 days after the hearing, she was back at Roper Hospital working the night shift, comforting the mother of a car accident, victim holding an elderly patient's hand until his daughter could arrive. She hadn't granted interviews. She hadn't returned calls from producers or publishers. She hadn't read the editorials or watched the news coverage. She folded laundry, helped Sadie with her science project, paid the utility bills. When her lawyer forwarded a request from 60 Minutes, she replied, "I'm just trying to stay current with groceries." But the world wouldn't let her disappear. 2 weeks later, Elise found a letter in her mailbox, not an email or message request, but actual handwritten correspondence with a Washington, D.C. return address. Inside was a note from Senator Barbara Manning, chair of the Senate Committee on Public Health and Safety. It read, "Dear Dr. Monroe, your courtroom testimony and the selfless actions that preceded it have inspired bipartisan legislation we're calling the Monroe Clause, a federal provision ensuring no emergency medical worker can face penalties for courtroom appearances made directly from their shift. Your integrity has changed not just hearts, but policy. Thank you for showing the country what honor looks like. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time, letter in hand, staring at the chipped coffee mug she'd used that morning. She didn't feel like someone who had influenced legislation. She felt like a mother trying not to forget permission slips. That evening, as she tucked Sadie into bed, her daughter whispered, "I saw a picture of you on someone's phone at school today." Elise raised her eyebrows curiously. "Really?" "They were discussing how you saved a man and how the judge made a mistake at first, but then he corrected it." Elise smiled gently. "Is that what they said?" "One boy said you were famous, like Beyoncé." "Famous?" Elise chuckled softly. "Well, I don't sing nearly as well." Sadie looked up with wide eyes. "Are you going to be on television?" Elise brushed her hand through her daughter's curls. "Maybe, but it's more important that I'm here with you, right now." The following morning a package arrived on her doorstep. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the pair of scrubs she'd worn to court, cleaned, pressed, folded neatly, along with a letter from the Smithsonian Institution. They had formally requested to include them in their new exhibit, Modern American Courage. The display would stand alongside firefighter gear from Ground Zero and boots from Hurricane Katrina responders. Elise didn't cry. She didn't smile broadly. She simply placed the scrubs back in the box, hands steady, and whispered, "I didn't wear these to be remembered. I wore them because someone needed me." As momentum built, so did the outreach. A curriculum developer from Minnesota created a unit titled Grace Under Pressure, Case Studies in Modern Heroism, built entirely around Elise's story. A hospital in Tulsa organized a vigil honoring underappreciated emergency workers, requesting Elise as their keynote speaker, though she never attended. She politely declined, writing instead, "I'm honored, but I already speak every time I enter a trauma bay. That's where my voice is most powerful." On the third Saturday after the hearing, something extraordinary happened. The city of Charleston declared a new civic holiday, Monroe Day, celebrating everyday service, integrity, and quiet strength. City Hall organized a modest ceremony. Elise only agreed to attend because Sadie begged to wear a dress and present her mom with flowers. Elise stood on a simple wooden stage in jeans and a navy sweater, holding her daughter's hand as the mayor read the proclamation. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed. But Elise didn't deliver grand speeches. She looked out over the crowd of nurses, teachers, EMTs, and custodians, people who understood what it meant to show up when nobody was watching, and simply said, "Thank you for allowing a moment to remind us that what we do behind the scenes matters." That was it. She stepped down, walked into the crowd, embraced people who had never met her but felt like family. Journalists requested quotes. She declined them all. 3 months later, Elise was back in court, not for custody but to testify on a public health funding proposal. The same judge, Howard Renshaw, sat behind the bench. When she took the witness stand, he gave her a long, almost reverent pause before nodding. She offered testimony that was measured, articulate, compelling. As she stood to leave, he said, "Dr. Monroe, I was wrong, not just that day, but for far too long before it. Thank you for making this courtroom better." She nodded once, eyes soft, and walked out without another word. Years from now, children will stand before a glass case in Washington, D.C., staring at a set of green scrubs. A plaque beside them will read, "Worn by Dr. Elise Monroe, surgeon, mother, witness. She showed up when it mattered most and taught a nation what strength looks like." Teachers will tell her story not because it ends in applause, but because it begins in truth. And somewhere, perhaps in a classroom or clinic or trauma bay, a little girl named Sadie will grow up knowing that her mother was never trying to be remembered. She was trying to make people feel seen. Because in a world obsessed with titles, image, and noise, sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that speaks only when someone else needs it most. Elise Monroe didn't save a man that morning to make history. She saved him because it was the right thing to do. And somehow in doing so, she didn't just keep his heart beating. She reminded the world what it means to be human.